Everyone says budgeting will fix your money problems. But what if you're starting from so close to zero that a budget just shows you how bad things actually are? That's where I was. And honestly, a spreadsheet full of red numbers doesn't feel like a solution. It feels like a reminder. So today I want to talk about budgeting. Not the Pinterest version with color-coded categories and a coffee budget you stick to perfectly. The real version. What it looks like when you're starting with almost nothing, and whether it actually helps or just stresses you out more. Let me start with what got me here. A few weeks ago, I decided to try something specific. I was spending way too much on groceries, like embarrassingly too much for one person, and I couldn't figure out where the money was going. So I decided to use AI to plan my grocery week. I gave it what I had in my fridge, asked it to build meals around that, and told it to keep the shopping list tight. I was half expecting it to tell me to eat rice 3 times a day, and part of me was ready to roast the whole thing. But something weird happened instead. I opened my fridge to take stock of what I had, and I realized I already had more food than I thought. There was stuff in the back of the freezer I forgot about. A can of beans, some pasta, half an onion that was still fine, and I'd been about to go spend $60 on groceries like none of that existed. The AI built me 5 meals from what I had. Real meals, not sad ones. And my shopping list that week came out to about $22. That moment wasn't really about the AI. It was about the fact that I'd never actually looked at what I had before deciding what to spend. I was just buying on autopilot every single week without thinking. That's when budgeting started to make sense to me, not as a punishment, but as the thing that forces you to actually look. So let's get into it. The standard advice around budgeting sounds like this: track your spending, divide your income into categories, spend less than you make, done. And on the surface, that sounds completely reasonable. It makes logical sense. If you spend less than what comes in, you start building something. If you spend more, you fall behind. Simple math. The reason people believe in budgeting so strongly is because it does work. For a lot of people, just the act of writing down what they're spending is enough to change their behavior. You realize you've been spending $40 a month on a subscription you forgot you had. You see that food delivery is taking up way more than you thought. The numbers reveal patterns you couldn't see before. That's real. That part is genuinely useful. But here's where it started to fall apart for me. Every budgeting guide I found was built around percentages. 50% of your income goes to needs, 30% to wants, 20% to savings. That's the famous 50-30-20 rule. And if you look at it on paper, it's clean, it's balanced, it sounds like a plan. But when I actually tried to apply it to my situation, something didn't add up. If you're making a very low income, which a lot of people my age are, the math just doesn't work. When rent alone eats up more than 50% of what comes in, the whole framework breaks. You can't put 30% toward wants because you don't have 30% left after rent and food and utilities. And saving 20% feels like a joke when you're sometimes short on the basics. That's not a discipline problem. That's a math problem. And I think that's the part no one says loudly enough. A lot of budgeting advice assumes you have enough money coming in for the percentages to land somewhere reasonable. If you don't, the framework doesn't collapse because you're bad at budgeting. It collapses because it wasn't designed for your situation. That realization was frustrating at first because I wanted the formula to work. I wanted to just follow the steps and have it fix things. But then I started thinking about what budgeting is actually doing underneath all the rules. At its core, a budget is just visibility. It's making yourself look at the full picture instead of living in the blur where you kind of know things are tight, but you're not sure exactly how tight. The problem isn't the budget. The problem is when the advice attached to it assumes you're working with a stable, comfortable income. So I had to figure out what budgeting looks like when you strip away the fancy structure and keep only what's useful. Here's where I landed. Step 1 is just knowing your real number. Not your salary, not your hourly rate times 40, your actual take-home number, after taxes, after whatever gets deducted, what actually hits your account each pay period. A lot of people don't know this number precisely, and that matters more than any category breakdown. Step 2 is listing your non-negotiable costs: rent, utilities, phone if you need it for work, transportation to get to your job, any debt minimums you have to pay. These aren't categories you can trim, they're fixed. Write them down and subtract them from your real number. What's left is your actual working money. That's the number you're actually making decisions with. And sometimes when you do that subtraction, the number is smaller than you expected. That's uncomfortable, but knowing it is better than guessing. Step 3 is groceries, because that's often where there's more flexibility than people think. This is where the AI grocery thing actually connected for me in a real way. Before I did that experiment, I was buying groceries based on what sounded good in the moment. I'd wander the store without a real plan and just pick things that felt like ingredients for meals I'd cook later. A lot of that food never became anything. It just slowly expired. The shift that actually helped was deciding what I was going to eat before I went to the store. Sounds obvious, but when you're stressed and tired, the idea of planning meals ahead feels like extra work on top of everything else. So most people skip it. What I found though is that even a loose plan, like 5 meals I might make this week using what I already have, cut down waste significantly. I stopped buying duplicates of things I already had. I stopped buying things that required 5 other ingredients I didn't have. I started actually finishing what I bought. And the savings were real, not dramatic like cutting your bill in half overnight, but consistent. Over a few weeks, it started to add up in a way that felt meaningful. That's the honest version of grocery budgeting. Not coupons and apps and spreadsheet tracking. Just decide what you're eating before you go, check what you already have, and only buy what you actually need to fill the gaps. Now here's where I want to talk about something that doesn't come up enough in budgeting conversations. There's a difference between cutting spending and having nothing to cut. Some budgeting advice treats every dollar as controllable. Like, if you just make better choices, the numbers will balance. And sure, eliminating a streaming service or making coffee at home can help. Small things add up. But there's a floor, a point where you can't cut anything else without it affecting your actual well-being. No coffee budget to trim because you're already not buying coffee. No dining out to reduce because you're already cooking every meal. No subscriptions to cancel because you cut those months ago. When you hit that floor, the advice to just spend less starts to feel like being told to breathe underwater. It's not useful. And I think that's worth saying clearly because a lot of people sit with this quiet shame around budgeting, like they must be doing it wrong because it isn't fixing things. But sometimes the budget is fine. The income is just genuinely too low for the expenses, and no amount of optimization changes that. That doesn't mean budgeting is worthless. It means the goal of budgeting shifts depending on where you are. If you're in survival mode, a budget isn't about growth. It's about triage, knowing exactly what has to be paid, making sure those things are covered first, and then being intentional with whatever's left. Even if what's left is small. If you're slightly above survival mode, the budget becomes a tool for finding small margins, places where you can shave a little, redirect a little, and start building something tiny. $5 here, $10 there. It's slow. It's not satisfying the way financial advice makes it sound, but it's real movement. That's the version I'm working with right now. I set up something very simple, not a complicated spreadsheet, just a note on my phone with 3 sections. What comes in, what has to go out, what's left. I look at it at the start of each month and again halfway through. That's it. When something unexpected comes up, which it always does, I can see quickly what I have to work with and make a decision from an actual number instead of a guess. It's not exciting. It's not a system I'd see someone post about. But it's working better than anything else I tried because it's honest about where I actually am. One more thing I want to mention because I think it's underrated. The psychological side of budgeting is real and nobody talks about it. Looking at your finances when they're bad is genuinely uncomfortable. There's this urge to not look, to just stay in the blur because seeing the numbers clearly somehow makes it more real. But that avoidance is usually what keeps people stuck. The problem doesn't get smaller when you look away. It just gets less visible. The grocery experiment taught me that in a weirdly practical way. I'd been avoiding looking at what I had because I didn't want to deal with the state of my fridge. And that avoidance was costing me money every week. The moment I actually looked, I had more to work with than I thought. Budgeting is the same thing at a larger scale. The discomfort of looking is the actual obstacle. Once you've looked, the next step usually becomes clearer than you expected. Is my budget perfect right now? No. Is it going to turn my situation around overnight? Definitely not. But I have a clearer picture than I had 3 months ago, and that clarity is actually doing something. It's changing the decisions I make in small moments throughout the week. That's the version of budgeting I can actually use. Not a rigid system built for someone making more than me, just a habit of looking honestly at the numbers and making decisions from there. If you're figuring this stuff out from zero like I am, this channel is where I'm testing these ideas in real life to see what actually holds up. If that sounds useful to you, it might be worth subscribing. I'm not here to tell you I've solved anything. I'm just documenting what I'm trying and what's actually happening when I apply it. Budgeting isn't magic, but ignoring the numbers doesn't help either. Somewhere in the middle of those two things is something you can actually use. If you're still trying to piece all of this together and you want to understand another part of money that took me a while to wrap my head around, YouTube is already pointing you to a video right now. The one on your screen is worth watching next. It connects to some of what we talked about today in a way that actually made things click for me. I think you'll get something useful out of it.